Councillor McLennan, a seconder, Councillor Wilding. Anyone against? That is carried unanimously. Councillors, do we have any declarations of interest on any item on the agenda? No, so we'll move on. Now, I believe that we have a deputation tonight from Michael Olds. If you'd like to take a seat at the table.
Who is or will be doing online later. My name is Michael Olds and I live at 63 2nd Avenue in Bassendean. And I'm making a deputation in relation to agenda item 12.3, draft local planning policy rights of way. And the deputation is that we ask the council to consider amending the rights of way strategy insofar as it relates to ROW2 between 1st and 2nd Avenues, bounded by Walter Road East and Anzac Terrace, to close the right of way and allow residents to purchase the land. We oppose the right of way being upgraded to be used as a vehicle or pedestrian thoroughfare. Thank you.
So just to clarify, the item that's on tonight's agenda is the policy, which relates to how council might deal with right-of-ways that are going to be upgraded. The strategy was actually passed in March of this year. I think I'm right with March. Yes, that sounds better. Yes. I would ask the CEO perhaps if there is a mechanism by which Mr. Olds might address this with the council or the administration.
Certainly. I might actually hand over to Mr. Gibson, but there is a strategy and we'll be looking to implement that strategy, and your right-of-way will come up as part of that. Thanks, Mr. Gibson.
Through the Chair, as the Mayor suggested, the strategy was adopted earlier this year, which recommended, amongst other things, that right-of-way 2 remain open and be upgraded. Right-of-way 2, which sits between 1st Ave and 2nd Ave, is the eastern extent of planning area D, and I suppose we're getting into another item on tonight's agenda, which is the draft local planning strategy, but councillors will be aware of the various planning areas identified in the draft strategy, and this right-of-way that's being referred to now is the eastern extent of planning area D, as I say. And it was council's decision back in March this year to leave all rights of way open where it formed part of an investigation area. So what the gentleman is seeking, being that the closure of the right of way could certainly be entertained, but it would be contrary to council's decision of March 2022. And it may well be that council would prefer to see the outcomes of those various planning investigations before it makes a decision on the associated right of way. I suppose if it is open to the landowner, any landowner in that area, to actually lodge a proposal with the town for council's consideration, even though that may well be contrary to the adopted strategy. If a landowner was to lodge a proposal showing how the land would be divided and allocated, and show that there is indeed support for that, that could also be contemplated, but that would require a fair bit of work on the part of the applicant.
So before you leave, Mr. Rolls, I will ask if there's any questions from councillors. Councillor Ames.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor, and through you, and thanks for coming in and providing your deputation this evening. Obviously, as Mr. Gibson was saying, there's has to be an agreement within the whole row for that, I suppose, process to go ahead.
Yes.
What's your level of communication with all residents that right of way moving forward? And if there was obviously information you have to provide to the administration moving into the future, would you have 100% agreement to what you're proposing?
To answer that last part first, the short answer is not yet or no. We've communicated with the potentially affected residents by way of letter. We've received about a dozen or so responses.
How many?
Or maybe 30, possibly a little more.
Sure.
The responses we've received are supportive of the closure. Some would, or a majority would like to purchase or would like the option to purchase, but not everybody would like to purchase.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So before you finish, Mr. Rolls, I might make a suggestion that perhaps if you need further clarity, that you engage directly with the planning staff to ascertain what information, I mean, clearly information from other residents in the area would be necessary to progress anything, but I do think that if you want to understand more about the process, perhaps engage directly with the administration. Oh, sorry, Councillor Clifford, I didn't see your hand.
Question for Director Gibson. So just in terms of, just that would then inform the question that I would ask.
I'll allow it.
In terms of that area which is under investigation, as you say, that's currently, I think, one of those split zoning areas. Is that the case?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
And that the outcome of that investigation could potentially be that that might then revert to a lower density, which would then have a bearing on the appropriateness of the laneways?
Through the chair, certainly the department's view is that the lots should be provided with a single residential code, whether it's higher or lower. That's obviously an outcome of the investigation. But the need or the value of the laneway to service those lots relative to the intended density and built form outcomes would certainly be part of that investigation. So if it was deemed that the planning investigation area D, say, could accommodate a higher residential density and would benefit from the laneway, that would obviously be part of council's future decision making. The decision back in March was that until any investigations are undertaken and decisions made by council, they should remain open as a default position.
Thank you. So you may have heard the director just explain that where you currently live has got split density, so you can go higher or lower. And so part of that investigation is to work out which of those will ultimately prevail, which will then have a bearing on the appropriateness of the laneways. Just in terms of your, I suppose, discussion with the neighbours, what is their view, if it has been canvassed, as to the appropriate density in that vicinity? Or was that question not raised?
That wasn't raised, that hasn't been
As
canvassed.
for yourself personally, what was your view on that?
In terms of, are you talking about ability to subdivide?
Yeah, so whether it should be R20 or R40.
I haven't given that any consideration, but I think my initial view would be that it should remain at a lower density code.
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rolls, for providing that deputation.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll move on to statements by members of the public. Now, I do have a couple of written statements here. However, I'm not going to read them all out. What I will advise is that every councillor has been provided with a copy of these written statements. The reason I'm not going to read them out is because they're all very lengthy. Councillors have been provided with all of these documents, but I will advise the names. The first one is from Nonnie Jebkinson of 6 Barton Parade, Bassendean, who would like to see the retention of green spaces within the town, and that's, I think, not a surprise. We have another deputation from Mr. Colin Davies, who did include all councillors into his email over the weekend, and Mr. Davies is also concerned about the Bindaring Park area and would like to see retention of the Anstey Road blocks that have been much discussed in this chamber. And there is a question from Mr. Don Yates. We haven't gone on to question time yet, so I'll leave that. I would ask if there are any members, so we're just doing statements at the moment. I'd ask if there are any members in the gallery who would like to make a statement at this time. Oh, Will. Okay. If you come to the microphone, your name and address would be excellent.
Can I just confirm this is just statements, not questions?
This is just statements, then we'll move on to question time.
Jane Bremer, 47 7th Avenue, Bassendean. My statement is in relation to the alternative weed management trial for playgrounds, obviously. And my statement is I went to, considerable efforts to prepare a deputation and table information here on that. and I provided information to the council that wasn't included in the minutes. And so I really would like to know why my deputation and reference material wasn't provided in the minutes, but
Okay, I will answer that question. I'll answer that question as we go. Now, I did actually respond to you, Ms. Bremer, on that one, and you will note that deputations are not generally included in the minutes, and that's been a long-standing practice of the town. But it's not only a practice of this town, it's a practice of many other local governments in the metropolitan area. Deputations, you did also indicate that your deputation was not on the recording. Now, I did go and check on that. The deputation was included completely in the recording. There was 2 recordings, unfortunately, loaded onto the website. The first one was the administration had difficulties with the recording that night, and it only came in at on block item. That's when that recording started. And then sometime later, a few days later, the full recording was loaded onto the website. So I do apologise for that first recording not having the first part of the meeting. But I do believe that was rectified as soon as the staff became aware that it was not fully loaded onto the website. So apologies for that, Ms. Bremer.
thank you. Yeah. I just want to state that despite giving a deputation and the broad community concern related to this issue, we were all expecting to wait 3 months for a report on this, and so no one saw it in the minutes or the agenda coming up. So I just want to express my disappointment that as a member of the public that's consistently raised this issue, given deputations, emailed councillors extensively, no one thought to alert me or anyone else in the community about this public interest issue being on the agenda tonight and decisions being made about it. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Bremer. Would any other member of the public like to make a statement before we move on to question time? Okay, so we'll move on to public question time. Generally, members of the public can ask up to 2 questions before we move on to the next person. If we have time left over, then we will go back to you if you have further questions. When you come up to the microphone, if you state your name and address, that would be advantageous. So would anyone in the gallery like to ask Mr. Lakanis, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Greg Lakanis, 186 West Road. I'm here just to ask some questions about the playground, the regional playground. Living a bit near it as I do, I've made a few observations. I'll just get my notes here, if I can still find them. Okay. Obviously, parking is an issue that was not foreseen. The success of the playground was obviously beyond expectations and beyond the abilities to cope with on the parking front. There's danger associated with that. I've observed a couple of things myself, but my neighbour observed a very near thing a couple of days ago that led to a lot of screaming and anguish around the end of West Road there, where a little girl ran from a car, and it was a close run thing, but she's okay. But I think it's a matter of time before something happens down there as a result of the traffic mixing with bicycles, mixing with dogs, mixing with people, and I don't think I've seen a horse down there yet, but yeah, there's going to be an event at some point, I believe, because of I'm not going to blame anybody for poor planning. I think the success of the playground was beyond expectations, so I'm not going to draw any concern over that. But one of the issues that strangely enough came to my attention today, and which I thought was true, a member of the community from the other side of the railway line came down and couldn't get a park. He was the inspector of my electrics today and told me he just turned around and went back home. So we've invited the world, but we've blocked our own residents from enjoying their own amenities.
So, Mr. Lakanis, if you have a question,
I do. So this is about, first of all, the sufficiency of parking. So it's insufficient. The cars are parking up West Road all the way, and you know, it's a concern for the reasons I said. Will the council consider approaching the Department of Land and Planning and Heritage regarding the use of the grassed area, which was used today by the over 55s walking club for their event today? Will it open that every weekend for public use to alleviate the parking issue, or make some approach to acquire the land for parking because there's insufficient parking?
So, Mr. Carter, I'll answer that as we go. Okay, so a couple of points there. The playground has attracted an enormous amount of initial attention, not the least because it was featured in a couple of social media sites that promote the best playgrounds in the metropolitan area. So the Sandy Beach playground hit top of the pops on that one. So it was promoted very heavily through some of the social media sites about playgrounds you must visit. My understanding is that the administration are waiting for, and correct me if I'm wrong, waiting for perhaps this surge of people to see if it abates somewhat. The land that you're talking about, the grassed area on the western side, is indeed owned by another government entity. And I would ask the administration, I think it might be a bit premature at this time to ask to acquire that.
We have asked.
Okay,
So
you
it's
have asked,
a
okay.
bush forever site?
Yes,
Yes.
so so it's a bush forever site, Mr. Lakanis. So the question has already been asked of that department.
Okay, my inquiries of the department was, yes, they noted that, but that the council could approach them regarding the use. And I would hope that the council will look at alleviating the parking issue. If it is indeed ongoing, I feel that it will be.
So, Mr. Lakanis, would you like our officer to provide some additional information?
Just through the chair, we initially, when the playground opened, we did contact Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage, and they said they couldn't approve parking, overflow parking in that location.
It's happening today.
I'm not aware of the different circumstances today, but
If either they allowed it or they just opened up the gate themselves, because it was full of cars today because of the event that was down at the flats. So
they've advised
it's
us
obviously
that we can't
possible.
use it for parking for the playground area.
Was somebody acting illegally and using that area then? It seems to me that it's this very day.
Okay, so we're not going to debate tonight.
No.
What I would like to do, Mr. Lakanis, is
I just-
to advise that we are looking at it as, well, there is going to be a stage 2 for that area to enhance some of the planting around the area, to look at artwork in the area and things like that. So your comments and any comments from the public certainly can be taken on board to look at stage 2, which is some months away, several months away anyway. But I will suggest to you that your comments will be taken on board. And I have actually had several conversations with your partner as well about this, so I'm aware.
Okay, there's a second question there. And this, I should preface with the fact that I love children, and was one myself, and I've had a few, and but I turn to the particularly little girls and their ability to project. Now there's over the long weekend, my whole life has changed down there. It's my whole existence is totally changed by that playground. I knew it would be affected to some degree, but one of the biggest things is the noise and the continuous, just it seems to me, the ecstatic children. And I don't blame the children whatsoever, but they are ecstatic and they're highly excited. And I was wondering what sort of noise mitigation might be applied to the situation to return the amenity that existed for the last 22 years in my case, that was down there. Now I know that a playground is obviously going to bring these kind of matters, with it, but was no consideration given to that matter. And is there any way the council could look at mitigating the level of noise that seems to enter directly into my living room.
So and this is purely speculation on my part, I would speculate that the volume of noise is probably associated with the volume of children that are attending that site at the moment. And as I indicated previously, there is an expectation that those volumes will reduce over the next couple of weekends, unless of course it gets another promotion on social media, which was it was very prolific. It got thousands of hits. So you're correct, we did not expect that. So I am sure that the staff are going to monitor the situation over the next coming weeks. And as indicated by the CEO, the stage 2 will take into account the feedback from residents who have already been providing some feedback,
And I
including
imagine
yourself.
one of the features, upcoming features, is a coffee shop and so on down there. Is that, are we going to be attracting more of the surroundings to the reserve?
Somebody wants to apply for a permit, they can.
What sort of other features are going to be
So,
what enhancements other than?
so there is the ability to apply for a permit for the coffee vans, food vans, things like that. I would ask the officer though, I think it's limited to how many could operate a permit down there at any time. Is that right, Mr. Gibson?
Through the chair, I believe there was a maximum of 3 mobile food vendors at any given time. I'm not aware of us receiving any applications to this point though.
So no applications have been received. But Mr. Lucanis, if you don't mind, I would like to ask others if they have questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's question time. You only do that during deputations, sorry. Sorry about that. Are there any other questions from residents? So come.
Aaron McKay, 33 North Road, Bassendean. I'll just ask a question. Is the council still looking at ascertaining more land at Point Reserve?
The Point Reserve concept plan, as far as I understand, will be going out for public consultation and comment. If not today, towards the end, yes. So once that feedback has been provided, then council will look at the feedback and listen to the officer's recommendations and make determinations, but those determinations have not actually been made as yet.
Okay, because I'm just curious, because at the last council meeting you mentioned that the council is a small council with limited funds on money that can actually ascertain sort of thing, and I was wondering why we were then looking to spread our assets of more land and more maintenance and more ongoing costs to the community. So I just would like to make sure that the town factors all that into any decisions that they make as councillors.
So I do have an understanding, and I again would like to be corrected if I'm wrong by the officer. My understanding is that if, and this is only if council decides to take on management of that land, that there would potentially be contribution from the existing body as an initial contribution, or yes?
Yes, through the chair, yes, they can provide funding towards the initial works, but not the ongoing maintenance.
Yes, that's exactly right. So it's initial works, not the ongoing maintenance. So ongoing maintenance we pass back on to the people of the town of Bassendean. My next question on that one is, the lighting in the car park there doesn't work. Only 1 out of 6 lights works there. I'm just curious as to how long they perceive that this issue might drag on before we can get some lights.
So I'll ask the officer to provide a response. I believe that the contractor was looking at that, so
Yep, I'll follow up on that. Thanks.
okay, so someone will come back to you on that one.
Okay. Councillor Renee did help me out on that one a little bit, so thank you, Renee. And my other question was, the rangers seem to indicate to me that they had been stripped of their power to move on vehicles that have been parked more than a long period of time. Is that correct?
Again, I'm unaware of that. I would ask the officer, Mr. Gibson.
Through the chair, there's provisions in the park and local law that sets out what triggers an offence. So if a vehicle's an obstruction, say, that constitutes an offence. So it depends on the specific circumstance you're sort of referring to, but happy to have a chat tomorrow if that suits.
Yeah, because the vehicle was parked there for more than a month in the same location. I'm just wondering, does that not inhibit the use of the park by other people in the park? The vehicle is constantly parked there?
Through the chair, if it's not causing an obstruction to access any other property and it's simply parked in the same location, that in of itself wouldn't be an offence. Some other local governments, local laws make it an offence after a prescribed period. The town's local law does not include that provision, so if it's not obstructing access to a property or an essential service or a town asset and it's lawfully parked, there's little that can be done about that.
So I'm going to stop you there and ask if others would like to ask questions.
Sorry, I only have one more thing.
Okay, I'll allow it, but
Yeah,
we
sorry.
usually limit to 2 questions and go around the room and then come back.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll let you ask this one.
Yeah, and people park and sleeping in tents at the reserve, is that something that has been stripped from the ranges as well?
Through the chair, no, that would be an offence under the property local law.
Okay, because someone's been sleeping in a tent for more than 5 days down there, so I'm just curious as to why the range hasn't moved them on.
Through the chair, I can follow that up and investigate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, would anybody else in the audience wish to ask any questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple.
Yes, sir.
Hey, how are you guys? My name's Chanel. I live at 88 Anzac Terrace. My questions today are just in regards to the right-of-way too. I just wanted to sort of get bearings on how long it would sort of take you guys to come in there and develop that right-of-way. Yeah, that's my first question.
Okay, so my understanding that one is in an area which is undergoing investigations about the density. Now that could take some time because the planning staff have several areas that they have to investigate, then they have to provide reports. So it could take some time, but I will actually ask the officer if he'd like to provide, Mr. Gibson, the director, if he'd like to provide a little bit more information.
Through the chair, nothing more to add to the mayor's comment is that, right-of-way 2 is, like I said earlier, sits between First Ave and Second Ave and is the eastern extent of planning area D. So it may well be that the council determines in due course that the right-of-way is indeed to be retained. And in terms of how long it may be before the area, the right-of-way, assuming it is retained, how long it is until it is upgraded, that would be a decision for a future council based on the volume of contributions that might have been collected to that point. So, unfortunately, very hard to foreshadow.
Yeah, not a problem at all. And it's probably in relation to my second question. The investigation will obviously state that as well. But is there any procedures in place to protect the integrity of assets either side of the laneway and obviously down the laneway as well? Obviously, there's a main sewer drain that runs through there, which is quite shallow, and obviously people have fences. The properties on Walter Road, either side, Walter Road and Anzac Terrace, either side of that right of way, are quite close to that fence line as well. But I assume that'll be assessed in the investigation as well.
Through the chair, and probably more so in terms of doing the detailed designs. The investigation is probably more from a land use planning and housing intensity point of view. If it is deemed that the right-of-way would be retained and in due course upgraded, obviously there would be the finer grain analysis of essential services, levels, drainage, lighting, bollards, traffic control, and that would come under the broad banner of a detailed design.
Yeah, no worries. My questions are a little bit premature. Sorry about that, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. So unless there are any other, Miss Brooke.
You don't have any questions?
Sorry. I think we've actually done the 15 minutes for question time, but I'll, can I have a mover to extend question time? Councillor Wilding, seconded Councillor Carting. Anyone against? We'll extend question time for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Jane Bremer, 47 7th Avenue, Bassendean. My question's in relation to, I think it's 12.5 on the agenda, the alternative weed management review strategy for children's playgrounds. My question is, the officer's report suggests that using non-chemical weed management in 3 playgrounds will increase costs from $7,500 to $75,000. It's quite an incredible increase, tenfold in fact. So I'd like to ask where the costings for this are, and did the costings include asking the council's pre-existing pesticide contractors? The reason I ask this question is because I have been in touch with the City of Joondalup, and they advise that to handweed their many more children's playgrounds only resulted in an increased cost of $7,200. So I strongly query the figures that are in the officer's report, as well as a lot of the statements that are made as well.
So, Ms. Bremer, you're entitled to ask questions, but let's not cast any sort of doubt on the information. We can ask the question, and that's fine. So I will ask Ms. Davies, I think, would handle this one. So.
Through the chair, it's just a general indication of the cost. We haven't obtained quotes, and it's based on experience for similar projects that involve steam weeding and hand weeding in comparison.
Okay.
Did that involve seeking quotes from pre-existing pesticide contractors within the town?
No.
So we don't have a breakdown of the different costs between steam weed control or manual weed control?
So.
Have any of those details?
Through the chair, the cost was to undertake both because both would be needed. There's no detailed breakdown, it's just a general indication.
Thank you, Ms. Bremer. Are there any other questions? So I do have, sorry, Mr. Clark, I can't see you, so I was just checking that you were, I was just checking you weren't going to ask a question. I do have a question here that was sent in by email from Mr. Don Yates, but my understanding is that the officers are going to provide a written response to Mr. Yates, so I won't read that one out either. And unless we have any other questions from members in the audience, we'll move on to the next item. And it looks like no other questions, so we will move on. So we'll move on to item 8, which is confirmation of the minutes. So, petitions, which was item 8, which there are none. Item 9 is confirmations of the minutes. So 9.1A, which is marked as B in the agenda. Can I have a mover that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 23rd of August be confirmed as a true record?
Can I just ask a question? Yeah. I just heard Ms Holmes at the beginning of the meeting maybe indicate there was an issue with the minutes.
So just above where it says officer recommendation, that should actually be the first recommendation.
Oh, okay.
That should be A,
So that's
that
A,
the minutes be received, and then B should be confirmed as a true record.
Okay.
If something's happened with it.
Yes, I did actually just realise that the A was incorrect, but I didn't actually. So, okay. So 9.1A, that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 23rd of August 2022 be received. Do I have a mover? Councillor McWilliams, seconded Councillor Wilding. Anyone against? I declare that carried. 9.1B, that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 23rd of August 2022 be confirmed as a true record. Mover, Councillor McLennan, seconded.
Not just yet, Madam Mayor, just like to note that there's been some dates in there that, I will hold my comment on that because that's the special council meeting today, so keep it going. Beautiful.
Okay. So I have a mover, Councillor McLennan, seconded Councillor Ames. Anyone against? I declare that carried. Same happened here. Okay. Okay, so 9.2A, that the minutes of the special council meeting held on the 20th of September 2022 be received. A mover, Councillor Ames, seconded Councillor Carter. Anyone against? I declare that carried. 9.2B, that the minutes of the special council meeting held on the 20th of September 2022 be confirmed as a true record. Moved Councillor Ames, seconded Councillor Carter. Anyone against?
Can I just ask, Councillor Ames, didn't you want to indicate there were some date issues? Were you a bit ahead of yourself, or?
No, because we had a special council meeting last week,
Yes.
so they were the changes that we had.
Okay, all right.
Yes, two different meetings.
Okay,
Thanks,
a
Councillor.
mover, a seconder. Do we have anyone against? I'll declare that carried. Thank you, councillors. External committee reports and updates, which is item 11.1. That council notes that no documents have been received from external committees within the reporting period. I have a mover, Councillor McWilliam, seconded Councillor Carter. Anyone against? I declare that carried. Okay, councillors, we will now move on to items on block. I have two items coming out of en bloc at the moment, which is 12.5 and 12.9. Do I have any other councillors wishing to remove any other items from en bloc? Okay, so I would like a mover to move item 12.3, 12.4, 12.12, 12.13 and 12.14 from en bloc. Do I have a mover for those items? Councillor Wilding, seconded Councillor McLennan. Do I have anyone against? I'll declare those carried. So councillors, we will now move on to reports. The first report is 12.2, draft local planning strategy. And I would ask the officer if you would like to speak to this, Mr. Gibson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, only briefly just to sort of cover off on a bit of the discussion that occurred last week. As foreshadowed, there were a number of additional modifications that have been identified. They're not particularly problematic or impactful, but just, I suppose, speak to the accuracy of the document. And to deal with some comments that we received after the consultation period. So those changes have been identified in red. Probably the main change you'd notice is in relation to the industrial area. Not suggesting a significant shift in terms of the strategic direction for the industrial area, but simply noting that as part of a future Ashfield precinct plan, it would be open to the town council and the department at the time to actually set the precinct boundary, and that may encroach into the industrial area if it was deemed appropriate. So it's just simply making reference to that potential as opposed to embedding any particular direction into the strategy. So like I say, largely innocuous changes, but identified in red for council's convenience.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Councillors, I understand that there are some questions, so Councillor Plifka.
I sent through an amendment to that earlier today, so I just foreshadow that I'd be happy to move the officer's recommendation with that amendment, just so that if people have questions about that amendment, they can ask those now.
Okay. So
I suppose councillors are all familiar with that, so at the appropriate time I'll move that accordingly, but just wanted to give notice so people can ask those questions if necessary.
That's fine, Councillor Plifka. So councillors, do you have any questions of the officer at this time? That's very quiet. Okay. So Councillor Plifka, would you like to read out your amendment so that everyone is clear as to what needs to be?
So that's Amendment 18. So it's an amendment to Amendment 18, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So what we have there, the particular part of that I wish to amend is the second dot point, which commences reviewing the zonings and reservations. So everyone can see the text as is presently proposed. So I will read out my amendment.
Just read out the whole paragraph with your amendments.
Yes. So reviewing the zonings and reservations that currently apply to 17 Harcourt Street, 18 Anstey Road, and 29 Highland Street. The above review should consider environmental outcomes, quantity of open space, impact on private landowners, the desire for the swift cessation of TPS 4A, the desire to provide additional open space in the subject location, the financial impost of providing such space, and the need to provide open space across the whole of the TPS 4A area. That is how it will read should the amendments that I propose to make be made.
Okay. So I would ask if anyone would like to second that. Councillor Wilding has seconded that. Is there anyone against?
Could I ask a question?
Yes, you certainly may. We have moved probably a bit faster. I was expecting questions. But...
Okay, just one question. How does this, your amendment, Councillor Paluka, make a substantial change to the one that we're looking at?
Happy to answer that.
Yes, please.
So the key changes there, so we're saying that there will be a review in relation to those properties that remain. Those 4 Anstey Road lots that were the subject of a previous council resolution, they've been taken out of that process, so they will, subject to council making some other decision, they would remain as was previously resolved, which is as local open space. The other parts of that which I have removed was the comment about the financial sustainable management of town-owned assets. Now, there's a twofold reason for that. One being that there is already a mention of the financial impost of providing such space, and secondly, to divorce the 4A scheme from the broader context of the financial position of the town. In terms of, there was one other, which was, the comments, the need to provide open space across the whole of the district. Now, the reason why I've changed that from the whole of the district to the town planning scheme 4A area is because the money that was raised from that area through taking contributions from residents when they sought to develop their land, in my view, that needs to find its way back into that area rather than the wider town of Bassendean. So I mean, those are the reasons for making those amendments.
Thank you very much.
And Councillor,
I just wanted to seek Mr Gibson, I noticed your comments in relation to the amendment that was submitted earlier today. And do I understand it correctly that you don't have concerns about this particular amendment?
Through the chair, obviously it's not the town's preferred approach, but that said, it's not considered overly problematic. As I said in my email to councillors earlier today, the omission of certain aspects don't necessarily fetter a future decision of council, and just because it is not explicitly referenced in the draft strategy or in due course in the adopted strategy, doesn't mean they can't be genuine considerations at that time.
Thank you.
So can I also ask a question, Mr Gibson? The following paragraph after that one, and I'll read it out. Therefore, actions are recommended in part 1 to investigate the rationalisation of the proposed local open space reservations as recognised by TPS 4A under the local planning scheme. Now, my question on that one is, that seems to open up investigation of rationalisation of all the local open space reservations within TPS 4A. And I'm just wondering why that is included. And my second part of my question is, would that being removed be problematic? Because I'm not sure what it adds.
Through the chair, I suppose it needs to be read in context of the preceding dot points, rather than just taken in isolation. It's simply there to link the discussion on page 2 to the actual to the actions listed in part 1. If council was of the mind to remove that last sentence, and again, it's probably not particularly problematic because the actions listed in part 1 are still listed in part 1. So
Yeah.
again, not the preferred approach of staff to change the document unnecessarily, because obviously we still need to have it considered by the Statutory Planning Committee, and obviously the greater number of changes that are made, obviously it
Did the SPC not endorse the original version that went out to advertising? And is this point 18 not an addition that's been added after it's come back from advertising?
through the chair, it's not an addition, it's an amendment to the existing text that was contained within the SPC endorsed version.
Yeah, right, okay, thank you for that. Thank you very much for that explanation. Councillor Plivka.
It's just a question following up on that particular text. So through you to Director Gibson. So they were saying investigate the rationalisation. Could we put investigate the rationalisation or retention? Because aren't they essentially the two options? We either sell something or we keep it.
Through the chair, again, no major issues with that change.
So could I ask the mover, because looking at point 1, it does seem to be somewhat of a duplication of actions that are already going to be undertaken in point 1. Could I ask the mover if he would accept an additional amendment to remove that last sentence from point 18?
In light of what Director Gibson has said, given that that wouldn't be consequential, I'm happy to accept that, given that it's consistent with the, I think, consistent with the amendment that I've made previously.
Thank you. And the seconder, Councillor Wilding, would you? Okay. So, councillors, we have a mover, Councillor Plivka, we have a seconder, Councillor Wilding, to these amendments. The mover and the seconder have accepted removing that last sentence from point 18. I would ask if there's anyone against. So I will declare that carried. Thank you, councillors. We'll now move on to item 12.5. Alternative weed control strategies, children's playgrounds. I believe this was removed because Councillor Wilding was considering asking questions on this one.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Given the comments made in question time, I'd like to move the procedural motion for the item.
Sorry.
Take the mask. Given the commentary from the public made in question time, I'd like to move the procedural motion to defer the item, noting that residents may have been caught off guard by the rapid timeframe which the items come back to council, and they require more time to provide the report before the council makes a decision.
Okay. Is there a seconder? Oh, okay, Councillor Carter. Councillor Plivka, yes, you have a question.
We're not allowed to debate, but we can ask questions. Is that?
Sorry, what was that?
We're not allowed to debate the procedural
No, we're not
motion,
allowed
but we
to
can
debate.
ask questions which
Can I ask
inform us.
questions on the procedural? Yeah. Yes.
So I can ask a question?
Yes.
Just administration, would this deferral cause any issues in terms of the contracting arrangements and weed management?
Through the chair, there would be no issue. We would continue the maintenance as per the current practices.
Okay, thank you.
Can I also ask a question through the officer? I attended the electric weed trial down at Hamilton Street some months ago, and I know that the state government and I think it's Walga as well are providing a report on that eventually. Do you have any sort of timeline on that report might come forward?
I would have to take that on notice. I'm not sure when it's available.
Okay, thank you for that. So if this is deferred, is there potential to defer it until that report might be available to this town?
Through the chair, that would be possible. Yep.
Okay, councillors, we have mover to defer, seconder to defer. So Councillor Wilding has moved to defer. Councillor Carter has seconded that. Do we have anyone against? Councillor McLennan, so we will enter into debate. No debate. No, sorry, there is no debate. Apologies. So all those in favour, please raise your hands on this one. So the only vote against is Councillor McLennan. Thank you. 12.6 is the RFQ, Streetscape Weed Control Services within the town of Bassendean. And I would ask the manager or director to provide information on that one. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There's no further information.
Okay. Councillor McLennan.
So last week at the briefing session, I asked about whether there'd be an opportunity to do something other than the office of recommendation. In particular, I was asking about the potential for rescission motion of council's previous decision and amendment to the contracts, and I was told that that wasn't possible. Are there any other alternatives for council at this point other than the contracts we have before us?
Through Madam Mayor, not from a contractual perspective. The manner in which it's gone out to market were several proportions, but it just wouldn't be considered a variation of the contracts. That would be within the normal terms of what a variation would be.
So if a decision wasn't made tonight about one of the companies who've submitted their responses, would that mean that we'd be in a situation where until another process was undertaken, we wouldn't be able to undertake any lead management?
Through the Mayor, that's correct.
Yeah. So that would be several months?
Yes, if it was another formal RFQ or tender process, it could be 3 to 6 months, depending on which process was required.
Thank you.
Councillors, are there any other questions? Councillor Plivka.
Yeah, just that comment on the duration of that process, is that a local government restriction, or is that just how the market would respond to any change that we would seek?
Through Madam Mayor, no, it's changing the entire nature of the contract, so it's certainly restricted by the regulations, the relevant regulations, because you're changing almost flipping it on its head, where we went to market with one proposal, and it's almost a mirror image to what we see change the contracts to.
So there's a local government restriction. If we were a private individual wanting to negotiate with them, we could do that, and potentially that could be resolved within a number of days. But you're saying that due to the processes local government has to follow, it could be several months.
Yes, that's correct. Due to the process local government has to follow, it would need to be an entirely new process.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
So councillors, unless we have other questions, do I have a mover for this? Councillor McWilliam. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ames. Do I have anyone against? I'll declare that carried. So 12.7 is parking restrictions, Harcourt Street, Lovelock Place and Lovelock Place. Again, this was comprehensively covered last week. However, I do understand that there were additional questions from councillors. So I will ask if the officer wishes to make any comment before we move to questions.
Through the chair, only to clarify that one of the questions that was raised last week in relation to a couple of properties south of the cafe and why there was no stopping restrictions, and those no stopping restrictions are simply there to protect the crossovers to the respective properties.
Okay. Councillors, are there any questions on this item? Okay, so do I have a mover, Councillor McLennan, a seconder, Councillor Ames? Anyone against? I'll declare that carried. So 12.8 is review of the Town of Bassendean Corporate Business Plan. So this is yourself, Ms Mabs. Again, you covered this last week. Is there anything additional that you would like to add, or?
There were just a couple of questions that came up last week, and one was around the empty circles in the corporate business
Yes.
plan. I guess if we were a purist, we probably wouldn't have them in there because the corporate business plan is supposed to reflect those funded projects that are approved by council as part of the budget process. And then also, should we include BAU activities projects? And that's probably a judgment call, but it's probably again reflective of the structure of our corporate business plan, which cascades from our strategic community plan. And I think council will have an opportunity to have a look at our SCP over the coming months and whether you want to sort of look for a sort of more tighter focused strategic community plan. That's something that you could consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mabs. Councillors, are there any questions on this item? Okay, I'll ask, do we have a mover for this item? Councillor Plifka, seconded Councillor McLennan. Is there anyone against? I'll declare that carried. Councillors, we move on to item 12.9. Now, there were some amendments sent through late mid-afternoon, thereabouts. I foreshadowed in an email that I would like to defer this item. However, I would also like to hear if there are any councillors who have additional questions on this.
My question is just around why you're proposing to defer this.
Because there was some email discussion regarding deputations and the process for handling deputations. Now, I do understand that the local meetings law relates to OCMs and not to briefing sessions. However, I felt that there was some variation between what we have for the OCMs and what was being proposed for the briefing session in respect to this policy. And because there was this difference, I felt that it might be advisable to defer it for a while to examine what was put forward this afternoon. It did come through late.
So my understanding is the version that we have now, which incorporates the changes that were proposed by various councillors, including myself and yourself, now is very much reflective of what the local law says. So if I'm correct, at 3.6 D, any person or group wishing to make a deputation to council is to either apply before the meeting to the CEO for approval or with the approval of the presiding person address the council, which is in alignment with the local law. So I'm unsure why you wanted to seek to defer it.
So the full local law indicates that if there is a written application to the CEO which is refused, that must come to council for approval or not, and that's not actually in this policy. So my question, and I'm happy to ask the CEO, my question there is, if someone writes and wishes to have a deputation and it's refused, what process do you see happening there? Because it was different from what I got in the email this afternoon.
So that situation has never arisen,
Yeah.
and I've always supported deputations, and I think CEOs normally do. If somebody is doing the same deputation at a briefing session and an OCM, you might question why a second time at the OCM. But what we've tried to do in this policy is also encourage people to make their deputations at the briefing session so that at the council meeting, councillors are ready to make a decision. So, but there is that provision for the presiding person to approve the deputation if the person attends the briefing session or OCM in any event.
Okay.
question to
Certainly.
explore that hypothetical. So as it currently stands, if it were the case that for whatever reason, I'm not suggesting that current or future CEO would do this, but if the CEO decided that they didn't want for the deputation to be received or to occur, and then it became the case that that person then turned up at a council meeting and then sought to deliver their deputation, and the presiding member then granted them that permission, would that cause some issue, just that there wouldn't be that, I suppose, continuity, they'd have sort of one answer from the CEO and a different answer from the presiding member?
The presiding member presides at the briefing session and the council meeting, so it would be the presiding member's call.
Yes, but I mean, that from that person's perspective, they would have got one answer from the CEO and a different answer from the presiding.
That has never occurred since.
No,
I've
no,
been
so
here.
it probably wouldn't occur, but I mean, if that did occur, then from I suppose a community-facing perspective, that might be a little confusing to a member of the public that doesn't necessarily.
I think it's intended to be a partnership, the administration and council. So we are the local government and we try and work together.
Well, yeah, exactly the point. That's why I thought if there was a mechanism whereby you could get that difference of opinion, that probably wouldn't be a good outcome.
No, and I always check in with the presiding person on the afternoon to advise if there have been any requests for deputations. So that would be a good practice that I would expect would continue.
Yeah, so effectively, so whilst as it's drafted, it does allow that, I suppose, difference of opinion that in practice you say it wouldn't arise, given the goodwill between a CEO and a mayor would ensure that that didn't occur.
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Could I just make a point? That's already written into our local law, which is we can't change tonight.
I can't hear you, Councillor.
I'm just saying that situation is already written into our adopted local law. So irrelevant of the policy, that is something that can already happen.
However, my understanding is that the local law only applies to the OCM and not the briefing sessions.
I understand that. I'm saying that the situation Councillor Kalifka has concerns about is already in our local law. So independent of what we decide tonight for the briefing session policy, it is already the situation in our local law for the ordinary council meetings.
Clearly, I remain, I would like to have further discussions with the CEO on this policy before we actually proceed. Now, that is the only reason why I'm suggesting a deferring. If you recall that the only reason that this became a policy was to actually initially move to have our meeting papers provided a day early. So there are some aspects that have arisen where I would prefer to have a discussion about it before we proceed. Now that's the basis for me wishing to move a deferral motion. I would still like to defer, and I would ask if there is a seconder for that. Councillor Ames? Okay, is there anyone, sorry, we don't do that. Yes, is there anyone against Councillor McLennan? So, minute clerk, Amy, you've got that.
Against?
Yeah. So 12:10 is the Audit and Governance Committee meeting on the 7th of September, 2020. So, wait, did you wish to add anything from last week?
There's nothing further that there isn't since last week, hasn't
Thank you. Are there any questions, councillors? Okay, so can I have a mover for that? Councillor McWilliam, Councillor Kalifka seconding. Anyone against? I declare that carried. Which brings us to item 12.11, which is proposed terms of reference for the Arts, Culture and Events Committee. Again, this was covered last week. I'm not sure if you have anything else to add to that. No. Councillors, are there any questions on this item? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Acknowledging council's desire to have a quality arts and events program, reading the officer's report, it does seem to indicate that there'd be a not insignificant amount of officer time for this committee, and that there would need to be resources redirected from other areas. I'm just wondering what you imagine the impact of this committee would have on those resources and other projects council's already committed to?
Through the chair, as the report sets out, is that there would be, like the council suggests, resource demand to service this committee, and that administration, report preparation, action in any resolutions, subsequent report preparation from the committee back to council. So whilst the town could seek additional resources to deal with that burden, given where we're at in terms of our sort of staff retention and attraction, it's more likely to be a case that we just simply redeploy existing resources from other projects. So whether that's Sandy Beach Stage 2, whether it's Big Reserve Master Plan, whether it's progress on the precinct structure plan for the Bassendean Town Centre, it's hard to put a finger on exactly where the resources will be drawn from, but they will need to be drawn from somewhere. And as a result, that comes with an undeniable opportunity cost. If that's a cost the council is happy to bear, and council is happy to accept delayed or deferred or discontinued other projects in the pursuit of a committee, that is obviously a decision that's open to council, but there is an action and a reaction.
Councillor Plivka. Yes, Councillor Ames.
Yeah, well, as was shown at the weekend with the RAC project, so absent a events committee, we do have good people at the town working in events, so we do already have resources deployed in that direction. So in terms of the additional resources, that would just be more in terms of the communication from the community to that committee, and then that committee to people that are already operating in that space for the town.
Through the chair, I probably wouldn't use the RAC grant as an example, because that is drawn on all parts of the town and is quite simply unsustainable to the point that I would recommend to council we do not do that again. And that is not just that's not relied on the 1.5 event staff that we have. That's relied on all corners of the organisation, and other things have been delayed, discarded, discontinued. We had the water truck out there this morning, watering the trees in Old Perth Road, which means the trees elsewhere were not being watered. So we have a small events team, we have a small events budget. The cost of servicing this committee would not be immaterial. Again, it's certainly open to council to pursue that if it so chooses. But the tasks would be, like with any other committee, the preparation of reports. The committee needs something to consider, rather than just being a meeting with little direction. There needs to be an agenda, there needs to be content to be discussed to enable the committee to make recommendations to council, which in of itself is another round of reports to write. And the reports go through a thorough checking process. It's not just one person writing a report, it's the author of the report. It's checked by executive staff, it's checked by the CEO. So it would be a not insignificant body of work. Whether that is indeed necessary to deliver the outcomes that council wants, that's a question for council to consider. But I think in terms of using the RAC and Power of the People project as an example, I would counsel against that.
Yeah, well, maybe something on a much smaller scale, given that that was a much larger project. But if the committee starts off smaller, I mean, it might be not missing significant events which had been, I suppose, celebrated by the town historically, just so that those decisions can be made. And I suppose that where an event that the community feels should have occurred but didn't occur, then I suppose the community can look to this committee and the broader council and say, well, this was an event we wanted and you as council didn't provide that. So in terms of providing more accountability, I suppose it puts the council at the forefront, saying that these are the events and this is the committee that's responsible for them occurring or not occurring.
Through the chair, I'd probably dispute a bit of that. Council, it's open to council to fund whenever it wants at budget time. The bottom line is council did not fund a great deal of events, and that's okay. That's just a conscious decision that this council made. If events were missed, I would suggest they weren't simply missed, it was just not deemed a priority by this council to fund them. And again, that's okay. If council wants to fund them in the future, that can be done. We had a good number of council workshops that dealt with the budget. Events were not raised at one of the 8 or 9 workshops. So again, that's okay. This wasn't seemingly a priority of this council. If that has now changed, that would be a good one to sort of work into the discussions as part of the next financial year's budget.
So you don't believe this committee would provide a safeguard against that overlooking budgetary allowances?
Through the chair, no. As the CEO pointed out previously, is this matter could more efficiently be dealt with a dedicated workshop through the budget process.
Okay, thanks.
So Councillor Ames, you had a question as well, sir?
No, I think I'll reserve my right to ask that question after the information that's been discussed between Councillor Plitka and Director Gibson. Thanks very much.
So Councillor McWilliam, what I will say before we go on is that I am going to split this into 2 sections. The first point 1 we will deal with initially, and then we will deal with point 2 separately. So just to advise councillors that that is how I will proceed with this item. So Councillor McWilliam, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think you might have been answered already, but so this is 3 meetings a year, right?
Maybe 4.
Maybe 4. And an appointment of someone to take minutes and to draft things up from time to time. There is an opportunity for members of the community to come in to be part of discussions?
Not, well, community members, okay, the way it's framed in the information, the report, community members can be invited to attend the meeting and certainly provide information if required. My understanding is that a committee of this nature could potentially in the future do a notice of motion through the committee to establish working groups if need be, which might be community members. But at this point in time, we are only discussing the establishment of a councillor-only committee, which will look at arts, culture and events for the 23-24 year and beyond. So it's nothing in this current financial year. It's not proposing new events for this current financial year. It's looking at the next financial year and beyond. And anything that is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, anything that's proposed by a committee without delegated authority must go before council for their review. So that's where we're at.
Okay, I'm just looking at this and thinking of it as a possibility to build some social capital using people in the town who are involved in the arts, whether to believe over some time now, a significant number of people.
So if it's a question to the officer.
So it sounded like to me that, you know, a workshop of councillors is one way of looking at it. But if there's an opportunity to bring people in to have a discussion about things, yes, it might end up being a bit of a wish list. But do you see that as being similarly cheaper to do than to allocate an ongoing resource?
Through the chair, whether public attend and contribute to the committee or not, it will require a resource. It will need staff there, probably executive staff in attendance. It will need a minute taker. It will need staff to draft reports. It will need executive staff to review those reports. So whether or not the community is involved, as the draft terms of reference set out, the community can be invited to attend, and that's on a needs basis with no voting rights. So that the draft terms of reference can accommodate the attendance of the community. And if you look at the second dot point of the objectives of the committee, and that is to provide advice on the formulation of the budget, that could similarly be satisfied by virtue of a workshop as part of a broader suite of workshops. But again, if council wants to pursue a committee, it is able to make that decision, but there will be implications for resourcing.
So at this point, I would advise that this report is to consider the terms of reference and appointment of councillors to a committee that has already been, the establishment of which has already been approved by council. So this is a report about the terms of reference. That's what we're considering here tonight. So, Councillor McLennan.
I hear what you're saying. I'd just like to acknowledge that I'd like to foreshadow to move a rescission of the previous council decision to establish that committee.
Thank you, Councillor McLennan. So, councillors, I'm going to actually suggest that we deal with point 1 of the officer recommendation first, and that is that one, council adopts the draft terms of reference as attached to the officer report for the Arts, Culture and Events Committee. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Carter, a seconder? Councillor Polifka, is there anyone against? Councillor McLennan. Do we wish to enter into debate? Yes, so Councillor Carter, would you like to open?
Very, very briefly, I'd like to say that we have been falling down on our arts and culture events in this town. I did bring to the council's attention when I joined council that we were heading to our 100th year anniversary and of naming of Bassendean. There are other things that we've brought up and they just fall into the ether. I'm hoping that having a formal committee, and I do realise that it's an impulse, but I think it's a highly important committee of this town, that we might take up a few of those things that makes Bassendean special. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Councillor Polifka, seconder.
I'll reserve, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McLennan.
Thank you for humouring me. I know that I'm going to probably be on my own with this one. I wasn't at the meeting when this was supported by council, and I would have voted against it at the time. The Mayor and myself have had conversations about this committee for a long time and about the importance of events and culture in the town. And I think everybody in this room knows that that's important. We know that it's value, we know it establishes or helps to build a real strong sense of community and place, things that we all know are really important. I don't think any of us disagree with that. But Mayor Hamilton and myself have had lots of conversations about this and about the most appropriate mechanism for us to deliver the kind of events and cultural experiences that we want for our community. And I don't believe that this committee is the best way for us to do that. I've been on lots of committees and you have wonderful people on them with great intentions, and I don't feel like any of the committees that I've sat on have actually delivered a lot of value add to the town. They've consumed an enormous amount of time at great expense, both our personal time but officer time as well. And I would suggest that we heed the advice of the staff that there are other ways that we can deliver the outcomes that we're wanting that are taking into consideration the very strong messages they've been giving us of late around the capacity of the organisation, around the limits that we have on our staff. I can't remember the wording that the staff used recently at a workshop, but it was saying that the staff are at breaking point. And if we don't listen to the warnings that the staff are giving us, we're going to lose more people. We won't have quality staff here.
McLennan, that's speculation.
Okay, maybe speculation, but you make speculation yourself as well, Madam Mayor. We need to take that into consideration, whether or not we're making a decision that is supporting the organisation, whether it's taking away from the things that we're here to support. The point was made by the staff that not one person around this table raised an event as part of the budget process. That is how the staff get direction around what they are to deliver during the year. We could have taken that opportunity to make sure events that were important to us or that community members had raised with us were included in the budget process. The fact that they're not being delivered is not the fault of the staff. That is because councillors have chosen not to make that a priority. So I would urge all of you to consider whether or not supporting this committee, as much as we want quality events and culture in our town, is the most, whether it is the best decision that we can make, whether it is going to take our resources away from other important projects, and whether we can deliver this through another mechanism. Hence my proposal to rescind the previous council resolution and instead support councillors' workshops. We can discuss with our community as well and ensure that the events and cultural activities that we want included in our calendar are fed into the system and can be budgeted for in the next financial year.
Thank you, Councillor McLennan. Are there any other speakers for? Councillor McWilliam?
I think that that is possible to have, I think it is possible to give it the remit to actually look at the next 12 months and the next 5 years. We should be able to identify particular events that we would like to have, as Councillor Carter's indicated before. We missed a number of opportunities. And then to cut our cloth on a rolling budget through several years as to whether we will be able to do more, or some, or none. But hopefully some, most, and hopefully most. So I'm speaking in support of this. I do think that the remit should not be for 12 months. I think it should be to identify opportunities for events, to take a longer vision with it, and to consider it as a budget item every year.
Thank you, Councillor McWilliam. Any other speakers against? Speakers for and against, Councillor Ames?
I am super on the fence with this one here, but I'd like to echo the sentiment of Councillor McWilliam's information here. I dare say everyone in the room knows that I'm a massive fan of events. I love organising events, but I only organise them, and I always do them, I always participate in them when I know it's the right time to be able to do that. We've been speaking a lot in regards to where we're at as a town, in regards to our time, in regards to the obvious dollars and cents that are within our town and how we can use them a lot more sensibly. I go back to one of my election notices to say that we need to be more sensible with our time and more sensible with our finances. We've also had discussions in regards to what happens around this table, and I'd like to echo Councillor McLennan's comments in regards to if we really wanted to do an event, we would have already spoken about it. Obviously, there's a lot of things happening within our very small town and our council that might be a bit more important than events and having a good time. But I also believe there's also some more economic ways and more sensible ways in which we can still bring that to the surface very strongly. And it's, everyone in this room, but also council, for us to be able to come up with those times and ways within workshops. I love a workshop, and I think we get some very valuable information in and around that. But after hearing what our directors have been talking about for the last couple of months, and where we're going, like we're already 6 months, almost 6 months into our financial year. The 6 months is going to come very quickly when we get the opportunity to be able to rebudget. We look at our mid-year financial review. We also look at our budgeting, at the start of February, March next year, and I reckon that's where we can really push forward to be able to put some finances in the kitty to not just do events that might just be there for an event, but to really make an event that is really going to be community orientated. It's going to get more of our community engaged, and it's really going to put Bassendean back on the map in regards to our events and our culture. So, as I said, very much on the fence, and I know we've been speaking about this a lot in there, Hamilton, but I need to also really take on board our directors' thought processes, because they provide us with a lot of guidance. So at this point in time, I'd like to speak against our particular committee, but don't get me wrong, I'm looking forward to it. So thanks for your time.
That's fine, Councillor Ames. Everyone's entitled to their opinion.
Thank you.
I'd like to speak for the motion, and I've listened to all the comments. Firstly, I think this is a forward-looking committee, not backward. I'm not looking at what happened last year or the year before. That is not the intent of this committee. This committee is intended to be forward-looking. It's intended to look at how we can involve the community. A workshop behind closed doors does not involve the community. A workshop behind closed doors does not reach out to those people who can help us produce events. The arts and culture plan that was produced for this town was an excellent document that has hardly been implemented. There were around about 15 community members who were involved in the creation of that document. These are people in our town who are a resource that we do not tap into. I do not see how we can tap into those people in a workshop situation behind closed doors. So I disagree that we are going to utilise our time best by having a workshop about events. I disagree very much with that. I had indicated very specifically with this committee that we would be looking at 2004 financial year onwards. 2023-24 financial year. Sorry, I'm a little bit behind there. And I'm not looking at just that financial year, I'm looking long term. And I would agree that masterful, well done events take a long time to come together. So I have no intention of trying to burden the staff with a massive number of events that are going to actually take up significant staff time. In fact, I'm looking at the opposite end of the scale. I'm looking at how the community might be able to assist us to produce events that will relieve the staff of some of their burden. Now, this is a hope. I do not know if that will come to fruition until we try. And the only way that I can see how we can try this is through a committee. Now, it may be a waste of time. It may not eventuate in anything, but it might just work. And unless we try, and it's basically any committee finishes at the beginning of an election, when the election in October. So we have 1 year before the next elections. Then a new council will decide whether that committee continues to exist. So it's 4 meetings between here and October next year to try and see if we can plan for the future. This is all it is. Now, I support this. I have, as indicated by the Deputy Mayor, engaged in multiple conversations for not 1 year, but something like 3 years. I would not come to this point if I thought that there was another methodology that would work. So this is my stance, and I'll now ask the Councillor Plifka. Sorry.
Just to confirm through CEO, if I've reserved, I get to then make a statement at the end of debate. Is that not the case?
I think that's fine.
Okay. So we have Councillor Plifka, Councillor Wilding's just put up her hand, and then we have Councillor Carter who can close. Okay.
So, I've listened carefully to the administration, and I think what it comes down to is money, and I accept that a committee is going to take resources, and the way in which you acquire more resources is through money. So money is what we're looking at here. There was a gentleman earlier today that was reminding us about Point Reserve. If we took a more expansive view of Point Reserve and took more lands along the river, that would come with a cost. So that was an indication of we could have a larger park, which would be more expensive. Or alternatively, we could have a smaller park, which costs less. But perhaps that could be, at that smaller park, we could accommodate arts, culture and events, as opposed to a much larger park, which we're paying for, at which none of these things happen. And there's no point having a park or something like that if we're not getting the events into them. And I understand money is tight at the moment, and we do need to find the money elsewhere, and it would be unfair to say to administration, business as usual, just keep doing what you're doing and add this on top. We will need to find the money somewhere else. But that comes down to our priorities. I mean, what are our priorities? I mean, do we say our financial position is not great, so what we're going to start with is arts, culture and events. So we're just going to cut the things that make us human, and we're just going to focus on other things. I think as a council, I mean, we do have an obligation to participate in community building, and I think these events are part of that. So rather than us just saying, well, let's balance everything, acquire more assets, maintain assets, I mean, maybe there does need to be a bit of leeway where we can say, well, that stuff is important, but building the community is also important. So I think there is a balance to be struck, and I hope that this committee, if it does go forward, strikes that balance, and that we don't leave the administration short of assets, short of resources, that we can deploy whatever resources are required. But I think this is an important thing that we should make happen.
Thank you. Councillor Wilding.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I sit very similar to Councillor Haynes on this motion, in that information from the staff regarding the impost that would place on them is very compelling. Though I do also note that our current our current delivery of events does leave us somewhat wanting. I do want to correct the record regarding budget contribution towards events. There was the creation of a reserve specifically for events in the budget process, and while that's not a particular event or a significant amount, I think it signals an intention from council that we would like to do more in that space, but moving out of COVID and out of the absolute shutdown that COVID created. I don't know if any of us around this table are particularly sure of the exact right direction or the exact right mechanism to do that. So in the absence of this motion, of this resolution passing, I would suggest that maybe workshops are not sufficient to get to the level that council currently wants. However, whether this is the mechanism which is the most appropriate to do that, particularly given the current terms of reference and the focus on mostly councillors and the limited opportunities for the public to be consistently involved, I do have doubts that this is the correct way to move forward for the events, acknowledging that I think all of us around the table do want to see more events and more liveliness in the town.
So, okay. Councillor Carter will finish up.
Thank you. Yes, believe me when I say I don't want to put an impost on the staff at all. We make many choices and there are opportunity costs for everything and every choice that we make. However, having been here for many years, as I do point out on some occasions, that I have seen what Bassendean can do with events and with celebrating the artists and creative people we have in our community. I don't see much of that happening in the last couple of years, and there are probably reasons for this, and this is not a criticism. All I'm saying is it's not working to this point. This is one method. I think it's probably, hopefully, a beginning. I fully support the fact that we do need to do this because we are, as I've said before, in this space, we are a community, not a corporation. And that is a very, very important and key part of what we do. And I think we owe it to our residents as well. So I fully support, this is a very small step, and I fully support the formation of the committee. I'm hoping that it won't cause
Councillor
too
Carter,
much.
it's not the formation of the committee, it's approval of the terms of reference.
Approval of the terms of reference for this committee. And I hope it won't cause staff too much issue, but I think it's important in itself. Thank you.
So councillors, point 1 is that council adopts the draft terms of reference as attached to the officer report for the Arts, Culture and Events Committee. That has already been approved by this council. So we have debated. I would like to ask those who are in support to put their hands up. So it's Councillor William, Polifka, Carter and Hamilton. Those against? Councillor McLennan, Ames and Wilding. So that is carried. Okay. Point 2 is the appointment of councillors to the Arts, Culture and Events Committee until the next local election, which is in October next year. Now, despite the fact that some councillors may have voted against this, I would open the floor to any councillor who wishes to be on this committee. I would like to be on this committee, and I believe that means that I can, as the presiding person, be on the committee. Yes, right. So that leaves 2 more spaces on this committee, and I would like to ask the administration a question on this. If council wanted, like we've got 3 spaces, but if they wanted 4, is that a problem? No. Okay. So councillors, councillor.
Quick question, Madam Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
And thanks for council for putting that decision through. Is there a proposed time, day, time slot in regards to when presiding member might want to do that, or is that something that is discussed outside of our chambers?
Okay, so that, okay. So if we change it to 4 councillors, that would require an amendment, but let's just see where we sit here at the moment anyway. So, so Councillor Ames asked if there was a timeline for when this committee could happen. Now, I do know that Councillor Polifka had originally asked if this committee could follow on from, say, another one like the the emergency committee or something like that. So my question, Councillor Ames's question is timeline for this.
So we can certainly look at the logistics of this in terms of which councillors end up on the committee and their availability.
Councillors, respect please. So, okay, so this is a discussion which can happen and be canvassed with those members who become members of the committee. Okay, so I've put my hand up. Councillors, who else would like to put their hand up for this committee? Councillor Carter?
Councillor Ames is the tall one.
Oh, I'm super tall.
You can look, yes.
Councillor Ames. See, he has his hand up. So, okay, councillors. I have Councillor Carter who put her hand up. I have Councillor McWilliam who wanted Councillor Ames to put his hand up. He's put his hand up. Now I'm just trying to ascertain here who I've got in the room here.
Is there an opportunity to take 24 hours to sleep on it, Madam Mayor?
No.
In terms of
So we're not going to go forward.
That shirt says you need to be on the committee.
Okay, so we have three. No, we're just going to do three. Okay, so we have myself, Councillor Ames, and Councillor Carter. Have you got that, Amy? Yes. Right, thank you. Okay, now, can I have a mover for point 2, which appoints these three people? Councillor McWilliam, do we have a seconder? Councillor Plivka, do we have anyone against? Okay, I declare that carried. That took a very long time. So councillor, I think that brings us to the end of the reports and we move on to, oh no, yes. That's the end of the reports, isn't it? The others are all on block. Yeah. Okay, so we move on to motions of which previous notice has been given. I do not believe there are any. We then move on to point 14, notices, announcements of notice of motion for the next meeting. Are there any councillors? No. There is no urgent business. There is no confidential business. So this brings us to closure of the meeting at 7:45 p.m. I think. Trying to see the clock with this. Can't see.